Here on Honest Women, we spend a lot of time talking about the roles that we play as women and as mothers. But today, we're turning the spotlight on the other half of the parenting pair, dads. But we can't do this alone. So join us as we work through the Honest Women's Guide to Fatherhood with insight from our husbands, the honest men. I almost feel a little bit guilty right now as we start this episode because we don't actually have our husbands on this episode.
No, we do not have our husbands on the episode. And actually, I was thinking about how much our husbands should be on the episode. And I can already hear my Dan saying, wait a minute, you're using my words and saying it's the honest men words. But what if that's not what I actually said? And it's your interpretation of what I said.
Yes. So today we're talking about fatherhood. We have been honest women for more than a year now. It's like 14 months at this point. And I just realized that while we've done so many episodes about motherhood and marriage and parenting, we've never done a single episode on dads. It's
How
like,
dare us?
I know, I feel a little bad. It's kind of like men, specifically our men, but all men and the roles that they play are in the wings of these stories, but they're never front and center. And so I thought we should do an episode on this. And we asked our men for feedback,
We did. We sure did.
but
To
we
be
did
fair,
not.
neither one of them like to be front and center. So we
No,
aren't like keeping them away from our listeners.
right.
They're not front and center kind of people like Andrea and I are.
Totally. But don't you think they're going to be jonesing for a mic after they hear this episode?
I think my husband's always jonesing for a mic, but he will never admit it. I also think he could have the world's funniest podcast, but he's like, I would never do that. So,
Well, if you are interested in actually hearing from
ooh, yes.
our husbands, we're going to call them the honest men or just Dan squared or something because both of our husbands are named Dan. Then what we want you to do today is leave us a review. This is going to sound funny, but here's how it's going to work. All you have to do is, if you're looking at the episode right now, you'll see the words honest women right below the title here. And when you click on that, it takes you to the show homepage and you have the option to leave us a rating and a review. This helps us a lot. It also helps us know that we're not just speaking into the void, but it mostly helps other people find the show. But what you can do today, because a lot of times, like, I just don't know what to write in a review. So click that 5-star mark, let everyone know the show's great, but then tell us, we want the honest dads, Dan squared, the honest men on the show. And if we get enough feedback like that, we'll put them on. You can also tell us, like, no, we don't want to hear from them,
But make
which
sure
is
you still
totally
do
fair.
the 5-star review.
Yes, the 5-star rating, the review, just tell us what you think. But today, they are not here. And it's funny because this is almost a mirror of what fatherhood is like in our culture. I feel like
Yeah.
a lot of
Ooh,
times, yeah, we think about
great point.
parenting, we think about moms. Dad is kind of an afterthought. And yet, at the same time, the expectations of dads have changed wildly from when our dads were dads, and they've never been higher.
I see that all over. I mean, social media is definitely one of them, right? I
Mm-hmm.
hate to always bang that drum, but I think that is predominantly where I see the expectation, how the expectation has shifted, and both from the role of a mom and a wife, but I see a lot of accounts from men saying, you need to
Mm-hmm.
do this, you should do this, we need to be doing this more. So it's both men and women that I see shifting it to a more dominant role within the relationship versus always playing that supportive role.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like what's expected of men is no longer just provide,
Correct.
although that is expected for
Mm-hmm.
sure. You need to provide, but also you need to be involved. But at the same time, there's still a lot of hapless dad content. Like, my
Mm-hmm.
husband doesn't know what school our kids go to, or my husband has never changed a diaper, or I feel like a married single mom. Have you heard that term
Oh, I've
recently?
definitely heard that. I'm
Mm-hmm.
married to my girlfriends. They're
Yes.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
who I'm married to. Oh, I
Mm-hmm.
hear that all the time.
Yeah, and I think that that is part of the old dad expectation. Like, it used to be just provide and not be involved, and there's still that kind of sitcom personality of the dad who just like doesn't know anything.
Mhm.
And at the same time, we're saying, no, that's wrong. Dads need to do more. They need to do better. And here we go.
Well, here's part of the problem too. Something I recognize is that the marker or the target, maybe
Hmm.
the end target has changed for men and women. That is something
Yes.
that I have a little empathy and compassion for, is that there's a lot of similarities in what we are expected to do
Hmm.
and how we're supposed to mold and work with our children. That is really not realistic at all.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very child centered and it's very heavy lifting and it's a lot. It's a lot for
It's a
us and
lot.
it's also a lot for men. And I think sometimes when I'm thinking about this parenting burden that I feel like we have in modern parenting, I really do just think about moms. I really
Oh, for
don't think
sure.
about dads at all. You
I
know?
agree. And I think my husband would say that's part of the problem. We hear a lot.
Okay, so as couples counselors, we see a lot of couples that fall apart after kids enter the scene, aka when we become moms or dads. Why do you think that is, Jess?
I think a lot of it is based around expectations. So the expectations we have for our partners or for ourselves, for our husbands as fathers, the expectations they set for themselves, none of that gets discussed. And they're
Mhm,
very different in early childhood versus when our kids start to get older.
mhm. You're so right. You know, I often hear people say that like motherhood doesn't, there's no guidebook. It doesn't come with a guidebook. And how often we wish that there was that. I also think that dads would benefit from that, right?
Oh,
Like,
for sure.
especially because they are somewhat sidelined through the beginning of the parenthood process, and then everything changes in terms of what we expect from them. And we both know as couples counselors that most dads, like their biggest fear, attachment fear, is that they fail in
Mhm.
some ways, right? The dads tend to be more of a withdrawing partner, not as emotionally forward. It's that core fear is that they would be a failure in some way. And I just think when these expectations, when we don't, and I just think when we, and I just think that when we don't, I'm like looking up so high and I know that I'm doing it. And I just think that when we have expectations that we have not explored and we have not communicated, it just leads to an outcome where I think dads can feel like they fail.
And then we as human beings look for evidence to support whatever belief we have. So if I
Hmm.
am a father who believes I continually get it wrong, and then I have a partner, a wife who is consistently telling me to do things differently or is criticizing the way I'm doing things, well, there's a lot of evidence to support I'm getting it wrong, which then leads to further withdrawal because it
Hmm.
feels icky to lean in
Hmm.
and not get it right.
Right. And then women who feel their partner withdrawing, especially at a time when they need him to step in and step up, feel that core fear of I'm alone.
Yep, it's
And
just too.
then can tend to respond with leaning in, AKA criticism, right?
You need to do this. You need to do that. Oh, you know
Hmm.
what? I'll just do it myself because you can't do it anyways, or you don't
Hmm.
know what to do. And it just perpetuates these beliefs that we have that either we are all alone or why try to do it? I'm not going to get it right anyways. I'm
Hmm.
failing my family. I'm just going to go over here and let her handle it.
Right. Gosh, it's a cycle and it's so
Yep.
destructive. Okay. So we have to, I feel like, try to take on an honest women's guide to fatherhood.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
In order for us to accurately speak to this, we have to put ourselves in the Wayback Machine. Okay, so Jess, can you
Mhm.
remember what pregnancy and early postpartum was like when you had your first? And I wonder what you or your husband, Dan, would say about dad's role in all of that time.
So a funny quote from my husband is I kind of said, "What was your role when our children were infants
Hmm.
versus now?" And his direct quote about when they were infants, when early, it's just a thing that needs to be fed. And then I had to stay there for a while and laugh. I'm like, "A thing?" He goes, "Yeah, it's just like a thing. It's just like there, and you just like
Mhm.
have to feed it, change its diaper. It's like a thing." He goes, "But then it turns into a real human being, and that's when they need their dad."
Oh.
And I was like, "Oh." And so I sat there for a while because if you haven't listened to our Money and Marriage, I like to wake up my husband at like 6 o'clock, 6:15 in the morning and have these conversations with him. Did it with Money and Marriage, also did
Mhm.
it with this conversation as well. So I'm sitting there, he kind of closes his eyes and I'm like, "Oh, no, I'm not done. I'm just, taking a pause here." But here, that was very enlightening to me because in early pregnancy, during pregnancy, and in infancy, I needed him
Mhm.
more than the child did. I needed him to connect with the baby. I needed him to assist me. I needed him to be part of the experience. But it was a lot more of a supportive role to me.
Mhm.
I was the
Mhm.
main character. He was my sidekick for
Yes,
that time period.
and I think that's how it should be.
Totally.
Honestly, I think a lot of times what our culture gets wrong in this period of time is not seeing mom enough as the main character and not seeing a husband's role and then a dad's role of supporting her as so vital
Mhm.
because that is vital. That is what we need from our partners in those early days. I asked my Dan about this and if he felt kind of, put to the side. Whew. And he said, I think you were so dependent on me. I did not feel pushed to the side. No, I wouldn't say that was true.
You're like, "Oh, should we talk more about that?"
Right, right. Yeah, he said you and my first son, he said you guys were an entity for most of the time, but I felt like I was really dependent on. And that was so true. Honestly, I wonder a little bit if the fact that our first parenthood experience was so bad, like if that helped us in a lot of ways. Because
Mhm.
I was not well. I had postpartum depression. It was pretty severe at the beginning. And then even after it wasn't, it was not a great situation because we had this colicky baby. And at that time in our life, we didn't have a lot of financial pressure. We lived in like a shitty little apartment, and his job was fairly contained. I was an unplanned stay at home mom, did not see that coming, did not actually want it, but didn't have a choice at the time. And I would look at my watch at like 4:59 and it would be like, he'd better fucking walk in that door at 5 o'clock. 5:01, I was texting, like, SOS, where are you? It was not going well, but he was super vital. And I do feel like that's what I needed. And I do feel like that's what most of us need.
Oh, for sure. You need somebody at that time in your life to support you,
Hmm.
right? So if that is how can I help with, getting out of bed in the morning when you're pregnant, or how can I
Right.
help with that, right? I think that if we can look at just these tangible things that women need,
Hmm.
actually men probably would be like, "That's it? That's all they need during
Right.
pregnancy," right? That's pretty easy. It's very much a little bit of a checklist of sorts. Then move into infancy, and as, my Dan had said, they're just a thing that needs to be fed, and I don't disagree with that,
It's so
right?
true.
It really is, but I think what was so great about how he phrased it is he kind of knew inherently that his role was going to change as they changed and as they
Hmm.
got older. So he was like, if I knew I was kind of on the sidelines for a little bit, but
Hmm.
there'd be a time when like coach is going to put me in kind
Yes.
of thing and play the game. And so I think that a lot of times men will think I'm not that needed and I'm never going to be needed
Mm.
versus in this stage in this phase of childhood or infancy, no, you aren't needed more than kind of a lot of intangible support, emotional support for the new mom.
Hmm.
But man, is that going to change and evolve
Oh,
into something more. So
yes.
relax. It's kind of like when they tell you to sleep before you have a new baby because you're
Hmm.
never going to sleep again. Kind of like that that's what I would tell dads, like new dads, like enjoy it now. because it's
Right.
going to get a lot more intense.
Yeah, it's like you've almost got a position in the chorus, but one
Totally.
day you are gonna be that lead, right? And
Oh,
that
yeah.
day is there sooner than you think it's gonna be.
This isn't forever. Like,
Mhm.
this is truly a season of your life. And I see a lot of young couples and new dads think this is how it's going to be forever. We're never going to
Mhm.
sleep. She's always going to be angry or stressed or frustrated or unkept, right? Like a lot of us
Right.
are. I hate to use the word unkept, but come
Or
on, ladies.
unhinged. You
I was
just
unkept and unhinged.
and
It's
stay
okay.
stay
Come on. Like it's and I think they like project that into the future and it's like,
Mhm.
guys, hang in there. It's not going to be like that forever. Just like we tell our new moms, it's not going to
Mhm.
be like that forever
Mhm.
either.
Yes.
It's a small time frame.
Keep it simple, right? Make sure your wife has something to drink. Make sure that she has something to eat. It's hard for her to meet her basic needs. And it's hard to be confident we have a new baby, but try. Try to be confident, right? Try to be an equal partner in the baby stuff, which, as your Dan said, it's so fucking physical. It is literally changing a diaper, holding. That's it. And trust yourself to stay connected to your partner. And if you make that your goal, I mean, this is the woman that you loved and you married and that you've decided to have a baby with. I mean, you're already good at this. You're already a success at keeping your eyes on her. Just continue to do it. Okay, so Jess, you hinted at before, your Dan had a sense that his role was about to change mightily. And this is the point where I think things start to fall apart for people. And the thing that I hear the most often is, and actually my husband brought this up. He said, I think that you, being me, want me to be able to operate autonomously with the kids more. And he said, I think I do. I do a good job. And actually, I think I'm a higher performer when you're not here. It's so
Hmm.
true.
Oh, so my husband would say the same thing if I asked him. He said, "Oh, it's so much." I went out to dinner a couple nights ago, like, "Hey, I'm
Hmm.
gonna go," and he's like, "Okay, bye, good, bye." He's like, "Oh, it's so much easier sometimes."
Totally.
And I
Yes.
agree.
And I think this is the thing that a lot of times as women, we do get in the way.
Oh,
We
for
want things
sure.
done our way.
If my husband was on the air right now and I said to him, "What prevents you from just like taking charge of doing something?" He would say me.
Right.
100%. He'd be like, is this a trick question? It's you, Jess, like you." And I'd be like, "I know, but still,
Right.
is there anything else?"
Yeah.
But to be fair, he'll say, "Jess, I'd love to cook dinner, but I have to make sure it is what you want or what you think is
Hmm.
good?" And so that's good feedback for me, where if I want assistance, if I want help, I have to allow him to take control and I have to know that it might not be how I do it. That is
Right.
very difficult. But he has said multiple times, my husband, like, it's your way or the highway. And so
Hmm.
either I have to buy into how you want to do it or I don't do it. And that's
Right.
where things can go off the rails.
Yeah, there is a real push pull here. I think, especially because moms start out their parenting journey in the main character role, that it's very easy to be like, okay, well, I know everything about how this baby operates. And now I know everything about how this toddler operates. And now I know everything, right? We grab on and we do sometimes have expertise that our husbands don't have in earlier years. But if we want them to be who we want them to be, right? We want them to be equal parents. We want them to be involved with our children and have those relationships. That's the thing that women come in and say to me day after day after day. I feel like I'm alone here. And I just know from my own house that some of that might be because I'm in the way.
Absolutely. And I think that is something as women, as mothers, we just have to own that part.
Hmm.
And then identify what am I willing to and what am I not willing to give over control. And I think there's
Hmm.
some things that we dig our heels in and vice versa. Same with men. But it
Hmm.
sets us up for a complete disaster. We stay in that primary role and we want our partners to come alongside us and we don't allow it and we
Hmm.
keep them in a supporting role even though we want them to be in a more dominant role. I also think we just don't talk about how to transition. from
Right.
that supporting role to more of a dominant role. So it can naturally happen.
Mhm.
But man, I would say 7 out of 10 times it is dicey.
Yeah. Yeah. I also think that this is a time where we really do expect our husbands to do more around the house. So, in addition to the parenting load being so heavy, the administrative load of having kids, the again, the financial burdens of having kids, and just the shit in our house like that has to get done, it is so much. And and this is like the other primary complaint that I hear, a lot of times feel like we're taking on an unequal share of the burden around the house. And sometimes, funny enough, this can even come out as a criticism like, well, my husband gets to be fun dad, but here I am kind of slaving away, like in the Cinderella role. And the answer here for the ladies in the house is you also have to stop doing that.
Totally.
So tell me about how things have changed as your kids have gotten older in terms of your Dan's role.
One of the best quotes from my husband that really gave me this aha moment and
Mhm.
led to some really good conversation is he said that his expectations for himself as a father get a lot bigger, and he feels that stress of being a father more and more as they get older. So he
Mhm.
said that his expectations of self have grown as they have grown and they become
Mhm.
bigger each day.
Yeah, I was definitely struck by the things that my husband was sharing about the weight on his shoulders.
As my kids got older, they turned towards him a lot more
Mm.
than they used to. They turned to him
Mhm.
for advice, for direction, for reassurance. I I saw that happen gradually, but at the same time overnight, where
Mhm.
all of a sudden it's, I want dad to also put me to bed. I want dad to be there. And, we were lucky a little bit in the sense of the pandemic for as horrible and as awful as it was. My husband works from home now. His
Mhm.
relationship with his children is substantially different
Mhm.
because he gets that time with them. And I'll be honest, I don't know if it would be the same if he was out in the away,
Right.
right? So I think that varies when you're not spending as much time with your kids. But man, do they want that one-on-one time. And my husband has very much said that he feels like so much of their confidence within themselves is on him as
Mm.
the dad. That is part of his role starting at a very young age. And I found
Mhm.
that one interesting. I didn't know that.
It's so funny. My Dan also mentioned how he felt like it was so important to support them in developing their self-esteem. And he mentioned stability, which is so, if you know my Dan is
It's
so
so him.
so him, so on point. But when he described what he thought his role was and how important he thought stability, financial stability, emotional and relational stability. And he mentioned specifically having come up with me. We dated for years before we got married, but I shared a lot about my parents' divorce and financial instability. And it really made me think a lot like, wow, this is so intentional. And it's so in service of me and our kids and the life that we wanted to build. And so there's that sense of us being a close family, trying to keep them connected to extended families, showing interest in what they like to do, and encouraging them to do things that they're excelling at. Those were the things that my Dan pointed out as I really feel like it's important that I support their self esteem. And that involves a lot of time and a lot of relationship.
Yeah, I think that's one thing then taken from our conversations, which so the listeners know we have not talked about what our husband said until we came on to
Hmm.
record this episode. So it's kind of the
Hmm.
first time we're both hearing what
Yep.
the other one said. And it's interesting that they both put confidence,
Hmm.
self-esteem as high on their list of things that they're responsible for. Now I want to
Hmm.
know where they got that from. If that was something intrinsic that they feel like they got from their fathers. Now I need more information.
I know I do too. I
Right?
really do too. I noticed that one of the things that my Dan is really focused on, and I think this is where the role of a father can be so vital. He's the one who's a little bit more likely to push our kids. So
Mm-hmm.
I do too, but he really takes it as his personal responsibility that they excel, that they like reach their fullest potential, where I'm a little more likely to come in with that softer, more understanding piece. We both drive our kids, but I think he really sees his role as helping them to be their best. He really takes that one on.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we're a little reversed in ours, where I'm a little bit harder and more of a
Mm,
pusher, and he's more apt to say it's okay.
yeah.
And that, I think that's how he nurtures
Mm,
versus like the emotional, right? When, somebody's crying and they want mom to be there, or they're sick and they want mom to be there, right? That's more of how I nurture as a
mhm.
mother. And I think that's how he nurtures as a father, of saying it's okay, you are enough. You don't
Mm,
have to do that thing because you're already good enough. Versus I'm
yes.
like, no, you should do that thing.
Yeah. Where's your medal, kid? No, but
I
it's
know.
true. We need both parents.
Yep.
We need both parents. So whichever way that falls, you need someone who's a push, and you need someone who is more affirming. And I think we flip-flop those roles all the time.
Not always by choice. Sometimes it just naturally
Right.
happens, or sometimes we fight about it, about
Mhm.
how you have to switch roles. To be
Yeah.
fair, none of this is perfect inside our own homes. I think
Mm-mm.
sometimes we talk through things, and this conversation was an easy one that I had with my husband because it was indirectly
Mhm.
about an episode that I was recording. It wasn't me criticizing him as a father. So
Right.
know that this is not perfect inside our homes at
No.
all. Not at
No.
all.
Not at all. The first thing that he mentioned when I asked him about his role today, and this is a quote, he thinks he doesn't swear, and he does. He says, "I feel like they lean on you for really hard shit, and I have a lot to offer in that way, and I'm missing that a little bit." And this is 100% true. I mean, this is probably a risk of having a therapist for a mother, and the amount of time that I spend with them is greater just because of our schedules. So I do think that we have to be conscientious, that especially if we as women want our husbands to share that load of being able to talk about tough stuff, that we don't inadvertently or intentionally block them from doing that. Because there is a little pride that I have when I was gone for the weekend and, my oldest son says, "It was a disaster without you here," because he wanted to talk about something. But the truth is, I don't want to be the only parent who can do that.
No.
And he's absolutely capable of filling that role, and I want him to.
If I was speaking to fathers, I would say have confidence in your ability to share your thoughts and opinions, to offer
Hmm.
insights based on your own life experiences. I will say
Hmm.
that naturally my kids go to either one of us, and oftentimes it's both of us at the same time. It is
Hmm.
certainly not me unless it's my daughter with girl based stuff that she just feels like I will understand. But my kids will go to both, and a lot of times I think it's because my husband over the past couple of years has really leaned into vulnerability, and
Hmm.
he talks about past experiences and he offers insights, and so I sometimes like actually defer to him. Like, you
Hmm.
should go ask dad about that. I think he can offer a lot of insights. And
Hmm.
I know for me as a mom, I had to attach this belief that I had to help them through everything. And when I did that and I sat on the sidelines for a little bit, I was like, oh my gosh, you have a lot to offer to
Hmm.
my husband, and a lot of insight to give these kiddos based on what you've gone through.
One more thing I was so struck by when I was asking these questions about fatherhood to my husband is how much my biggest struggles and fears and this kind of existential stuff that comes up for me in this season is totally mirrored by him. So, for example, he said, "I feel the speed picking up and the sense of urgency of wanting to make memories and have experiences with them." He talked about wanting to say yes to everything that was reasonable. And that, what I mean is, when my son says, "Dad, will you read to me?" My husband says yes, way more than I do. Way more. "Will you play a game with me?" Uh-huh. Yep, I'll do that. He has that sense of like, oh my God, that time is passing. And I think a lot of times we feel like we're going through this stuff alone. And It might just be that we're not asking. And when we talked about it and we could share a little bit of that burden, it felt really good. So we've made some things really explicit today. Like you said, a lot of times these expectations, we don't even know what they are. We don't know what they should be when we first have babies and then when our children get older. But all along the way, we do have expectations that aren't necessarily open. And we've really laid it out here, haven't we?
Well, I hope so. We'll find out.
Well, what are you taking away from this conversation today?
And I hope our listeners don't think I'm a huge asshole at my house. No, I'm kidding. My dad would be like, "Oh, I feel so vindicated." Like if, everybody sees that I deal with. No, here's the thing that I took from this conversation and is one, how asking a few couple questions again with your partner at 6:15 in the morning. I'm telling you, ladies, sometimes just get them when they're really vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be really helpful and insightful.
What I learned from asking a few simple questions of my husband is that he thinks really deeply about this stuff, that he feels the weight of his role. He has expectations for himself. He's aware of expectations that I have, right? I mean, we talk a lot in our house all the time, every day. But I don't often stop and say things like, "So, what are you going through as a dad at this time of your life? What are your hopes or your fears? What are your practical concerns and the biggest challenges?" Those are the questions that we asked our husbands. They were basic, but we just opened these doors. And I think it's so critical for women to open these doors for their husbands because a lot of times men don't have these conversations with one another. A lot of men are stuck in relationships, if they have friends, that are talking about sports or business or whatever, and don't have the opportunity to have this door open to them. And if we want them to move from supporting characters to main characters, we have to say, "Hey, your experience matters and you matter, and what you're trying to accomplish matters." And we can do that as women by asking just a few simple questions.
Before we close today, too, I just want to share. I asked my Dan directly, what advice would you offer to new dads who are just starting? And he said, take everyone's advice with a grain of salt. You know your kid better than anyone else. So file that advice away because you might need it later. But at the end of the day, trust your instincts, trust your gut, and don't let society or anybody else get in your head or take away your confidence that you can be a amazing father to that child. And I was like,
Mhm.
oh my gosh, look at you, Mr. Emotional. And he's like, oh, is that good? Is that good? Are you going to use that? You going to use that? I'm like, oh my
Are
God.
our husbands
Yes,
strutting around the house right now, feeling really good about themselves?
totally. He's probably like, wait a minute, what happened at 6:15 this morning?
Yeah. You know what the truth is? He should be strutting around the house because I feel really good about him. Because having this conversation made me feel even more connected and warm and tender towards my husband. So,
Same. And he's working from home right now and managing the kids as I'm recording this podcast. And I'm grateful for that. I don't know
mhm.
what they're doing. And I can tell you it might not be an approved activity by me. However, it's being done, it's
Right.
being taken care of.
So, we are not going to fool ourselves, listeners. We know that the vast majority of you are women. And we think that this episode could be a really, really good one to share with the man in your life, the father of your children, especially if it resonates with you. It's a great way to open up conversation about what it was like to be a dad in the early days, what it's like to be a dad these days, but more importantly, his own thoughts and feelings about fatherhood. It's one of the most impactful things that we can do in order to really validate the role for these men in our lives. So share this episode with your man. If you're on the episode page, click on those three little dots in the middle on Apple, and then you'll see share episode. It will open up a text message and you can send this right to him and kick off your own conversation. And please do leave us that rating and review and let us know if you would like the honest men to speak for themselves in a future episode.